Hello, Ben. Thank you very much for joining us today. I think we jump straight into the first question, if we can. The pandemic has, of course, had a massive effect on organising clubs across the whole of the UK. But how has the pandemic affected the events, the championships that BARC specifically organise?
Yeah, hi James, and hi everybody that's there this weekend giving it your time. I wish I could see you in person, but this is the next best thing. This is probably the view that everyone's got used to in the last 9 months is that of a Zoom screen and an old man on it. So that's me. Well, yeah, I think the first thing to say for me is that it's amazing what's been achieved last year in the end, because we crammed effectively a racing season into 3 months. We ran 11 racing events out of the 23 we were scheduled to run last year. We also managed to put together a 9-round calendar of the BTCC instead of 10. So rescuing part of a season last year was actually nothing short of a miracle. Everyone worked really hard to pull it all together. I think it probably illustrates the sheer bloody mindedness of the motorsport community to overcome the challenges that were faced. And it's probably fair to say that, you know, it's thanks to everybody, those on the meetings, those there this weekend. It's all right. Don't worry, it's only a dog. Listen, this is what we've all been doing. Don't stop the recording. This is real life. We've got children interrupting. I've got children interrupting Zoom calls and home learning and everything like that. So listen, don't worry about the dog. That's the least of the worries. I was just going to say, I think, firstly, thanks to everybody from the clerks, the stewards, the scrutineers, the timekeepers, you know, everybody that's probably going to be on these calls today, and all of their friends and all the people that did it with them, for the effort that they made in order to make some sort of sport possible in 2020. There's no doubt that it was financially devastating. You know, we lost, as a racing club, we lost 65% of our turnover last year. That has hurt us immensely, but we're still going. And hopefully we've got some optimism about 2021. The biggest victims last year for me were the venues, the permanent venues. Now, I know that no one's ever going to shed any tears for Jonathan Palmer, but Jonathan and MSV and us with our 3 venues and all the other fixed venues, both race and sprint and hill climb, were, I think, probably the worst affected of all of the parts of the sport last year. Because if you think about it, the competitors got their money back from their clubs. The clubs got their money back from the venues in terms of their track bookings, and the organising clubs got that money back. And it left the venues really with the permanent infrastructure, the fixed costs that go with maintaining that. So the grass still needed cutting, the paint still needed painting, the curbs still needed preparing, and the tarmac still needed looking after, and the power still comes in, and the rates, although we had a bit of a rates holiday, and where appropriate, some of the rent is still due, and so there was no money trickling up to those venues. And again, I'm not trying to pull on people's heartstrings, but I think we all looked after the right people. But it was the venues, I think, that copped for most of the flack last year, and left them in a difficult situation. Hopefully we won't have that repeated for 2021, but fingers crossed.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously Motorsport UK released some guidance to assist clubs in restarting in July, and we obviously worked with key stakeholders, including yourself and Jonathan Palmer as well, to help us to put that guidance together. Can you explain how useful that guidance was in getting yourselves back up and running again?
Yeah, it was. The fact is that last year we were all in uncharted territory. You know, everyone was doing their best and making their own decisions based on the information that they had. what we needed was the dissemination of information and common standards, so that everybody knew what was expected of them, or what was not going to get them into trouble, or how things were meant to be interpreted. And so that's why I think that it was really important that those common standards and that information came out of Motorsport UK, in order to make sure that we all knew what we were doing, and gave us all a degree of comfort that other people weren't either doing it better or doing it worse, or undercutting or over complicating. And furthermore, we didn't want to be wasting money on initiatives or equipment that actually had been considered by people who knew much more than we did, that wasn't actually necessary. So particularly we looked at the medical representatives coming through Motorsport UK, who guided us in terms of what PPE looked like. I mean, I'd never heard of FFP2, FFP3 and the like, and I couldn't possibly have made an informed judgment on what we should have been providing to who. But to have that coming out, that's exactly what the governing body needs to do in terms of its leadership position. I think in some places the changes have moved us forward as a sport. It might not be popular with everybody, but the paperwork and bureaucracy involved in our sport is awful, really. And if one good thing that's come out of the last year is that we've taken sort of a bonfire of red tape or of bureaucracy to some of the paperwork that we've been doing. And the sport needs to go from an analog base to a digital base. And while it might not all have been perfect with scrutineering, signing on, medicals, it's all been a real step forward in challenging what previously had been thought of as being sacrosanct, to saying, well, actually, you know what, we can do this without doing paperwork, without having reams and reams of paper everywhere, without asking people to queue up into a very small box every day in line astern to sign a piece of paper that confirms they're there. Yeah, of course, they've all got challenges, and I know that at everybody's people are now working on how we evolve what we did at short-term initiatives last year, and how we make those more permanent and more responsible. So scrutineering's clearly got an obvious challenge, that there was a lack potentially of scrutiny of the vehicles. But the principle of self-declaration is one that I think has got some merit, and means that we don't tie up lots of people doing lots of things. So reducing number of people in race control has also got to be a good thing, because it was getting to be a bit like a house party up there in many events, and most people don't need to be in race control. So I think the rule of 6 has probably been a very good thing in terms of how we manage race control in that kind of area.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's certainly made everybody reassess the processes and the procedures that they've become so well known basically over the years, haven't they, that we do things. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us to hit the reset button and reassess what we do going forwards. And I know during the weekday webinars this week that will be discussed a lot as well with the different officials there. So that's an interesting topic. Now, obviously, BARC, you operate venues all over the UK, and of course you operate Pembrey Circuit in South Wales. Wales being an area we know which has been particularly affected by the pandemic. Can you give us an insight into some of the work that's been going on behind the scenes there to get the events back up and running? Yeah,
Wales has been a disaster last year. No, nothing short of a disaster, and I live here. So I have to live with this disaster every day. I suspect, actually, in fairness to the Welsh government, we will only see in 12 months' time whether they've been overcautious and disastrous, or whether actually they had it right all along. So I wouldn't like to prejudge that. But the upshot of what they've done in Cardiff is that there were no events at all at Anglesey or Pembrey last year, with the exception of the test event that Anglesey ran for 100 people, which was always going to be a success, because we know that we can look after people. But it's been a disaster. but not just motorsport, actually. It's been the same across the whole country. I've sat on a lot of calls every fortnight, actually, with the Welsh Sports Association, which is a representative organisation of governing bodies and leisure providers, both indoor and outdoor, across Wales. And everybody has been pushing and fighting for their sport to be given dispensation to, if not break the rules, get some relaxation on the regulations that Wales has had in place. And nobody's been successful at getting those rules relaxed. So while motorsport, we tend to have a persecution complex because nobody likes us, actually it's no different. The only exceptions have been the professional sports, so football, rugby union, cricket to an extent. What's been particularly frustrating is that we've seen rogue events taking place in Wales. So landowners renting their fields or their forests to motocross events for one day or one weekend, getting 450 competitors, pitching up, making a load of money. And we're playing by the rules, governed by our governing body and adhering to all the regulations and being effectively penalised as a result of doing so, when they don't seem to have any sanction over those sort of rogue events. Where Wales have been better, though, is in the support funding. And while we haven't yet received anything from the Welsh government, they seem to be, the devolved administrations, and I can't speak for Scotland, but what I've seen from the outside looks like Scotland and Wales are more amenable to supporting industries or sports and venues in their national country with meaningful money, whereas Westminster clearly is worried about, maybe you could say they were more worried about bigger things than whether sport is continuing. So fingers crossed. We've put in for funding from the Welsh government. I'm not sure what other venues have done in Wales, but that's still ongoing. So we don't expect anything, but if we do get it, it will be a bonus. My sense in Wales is that we may get events in Q2 of this year. I don't think they'll be opening any kind of restriction up before Easter. So provided we can get back to where we almost were in the autumn, which was they introduced a limit of 30 people per event on an outdoor and an indoor basis. And then just as we went into the final lockdown, they increased in the outdoor environment that 30 could be multiple groups of 30 as long as they didn't interact with one another. I think within those regulations, we have scope to run normal club race meetings at the circuit. And if we can do that in Q2, that would be good news for us. But certainly I don't see mass gatherings anywhere in Wales in any kind of context before midsummer and possibly into the autumn.
Well, fingers crossed we can get it up and running in Q2, as you say. But what does the rest of 2021 look like for the BARC, wise and event wise?
I'm optimistic for 2021. I guess we have to be. But I'm optimistic for club sport. As I said, I think the spectator sports are going to have still some challenges in terms of whether people can get together into what we call normal crowds. But for club sport, I think we need three things. We need the ban on non-essential travel to be lifted. We need the ability for people to be able to travel from one region of the country to another region without worrying about the various tier levels. And we need permission for people to be able to do overnight stays. And I think if we can get those three things in place, which will probably be amongst the first relaxations of everything that's going on, I think provided we can get that, then there's no reason that club motorsport can't push on behind closed doors, whether that be hill climb or racing or sprinting. I'm sadly not close enough to rallying these days to know exactly where we stand on that one. But I mean, access to venues is clearly going to be a challenge there. But from a BARC point of view, I'm hopeful that it will be better than 2020. It couldn't really be be any worse. But that said, 2020 ended up being bad, but not as bad as it might have been when we were facing the worst parts of the lockdown. So yeah, hopefully 2021 for BARC, for Motorsport UK, for everybody, for all the officials, all the volunteers, all the marshals. You know, I'm really hoping that we get a good year, and thanks to everyone for their continued efforts and their continued support in helping us to do what we do. And we look forward to seeing you at an event very soon.